Hello there and welcome to In My Opinion. Another year of gaming has passed and I'd like to share my top 10 favorite titles out of the 24 I finished. As usual, this isn't just games that came out this year. After all, I have a giant backlog that I can chip at, as I'm sure you do as well. Also, just because some games don't make the list doesn't mean I hated them. With that, let's get on with the video. Number 10, Gungrave Gore. It was nice to return to the simple but fun and stylish series. Blasting a ton of goons and see them fall apart, but still giving you a challenge, and the unlockables make you interested in trying to do the other difficulties. It does suck that most of the voice acting was fucking pretty bad, but even with that dragging it a bit, I still had a good time. Number 9, Lamentum. Don't let the art style throw you off, as this is a pretty effective survival horror game. It's a simple setup of a man trying to save his ill wife, only to end up waking up in a mansion surrounded by horrifying creatures. The designs on these things are really grotesque, and the overall sound design really puts you in the mood. Of course, you have your backtracking and puzzles, but I will say at least 2 of the puzzles were really confusing. The combat is also not that bad once you get the hang of it. Number 8, Pumpkin Jack. I really enjoyed the visuals, atmosphere, and funny tone, and reading the dialogue between Jack and whoever else was entertaining. The platforming was also solid, and I liked how they mixed it up, like the Pumpkinhead mini sections. And the character designs such as the bosses looked great, and the boss fights themselves were fun. The combat, while simple, did its job, and the fact you kept getting brand new weapons kept things a bit fresh. Like I mentioned in my review, this is a game you should play for the Halloween season. Number 7, Panzer Paladin. A Mega Man-like game in that it's a 2D action platformer that lets you pick in what order you want to take out the bosses. The game has a good look to it, sporting the old school NES style. And it's fun not only controlling the giant robot Grit, but his android pilot Flame as well. It's also great that even if Grit gets knocked out, that Flame could hold her own still with her whip, making both characters actually really useful. I like that it had a crap ton of bosses to face, which are not only fun to fight, but also have unique designs. There's also the little cutscenes which have that old school 80s anime art style, which I've always been fond of. Number 6, Metroid Dread. Another entry to the Metroid series, and a great one at that. With some fun as hell combat, especially with the addition of a counter mechanic that starts to become second nature and makes you feel like a badass. Also some varied areas and challenging but enjoyable boss battles. Also the killer robots were a nice addition, as they add some enjoyably tense moments as you run away and when you try to kill them. I will say though that if you want the Samus to have a personality, you ain't getting it here. As it seems after Other M, which I actually had fun with, they went the totally opposite direction. And besides one line of dialogue, she's basically a mute that does cool things. I just wish they could find a happy medium instead of going to the extreme either way. Number 5, Shantae and the 7 Sirens. Oh Shantae, how I love these games, and this one's a good one. Some really fun platforming action here with some great visuals, designs, and animations. And I like the new Half Genies introduced in the game as well. While I didn't mind Half Genie's hero more level-based progression, I'm happy they went back to its more Metroid-like aspect, as in having one big area to explore with many parts to it. The game has some funny dialogue and character interactions, and not to mention some delightful boss fights that felt a little more challenging compared to the last game. I also like how Shantae's powers were a little better thought out this time around, as all of them felt useful. I can't wait for the next entry whenever that is. Number 4, Tormented Souls. This is a great survival horror title which harkens back to the old school Resident Evil games. The combat is enjoyable and we got tons of puzzles, though I will say there are a few that are way too cryptic. And had to be checking out a guide because there was no way in hell I was figuring it out. The building you explore has a fantastic horror atmosphere, and each part of it feels distinct from one another, with some great fixed camera angle shots. The story itself is a pretty good mystery, and you're not left confused by the end. If you have a classic survival horror itch that needs to be scratched, this game does a damn fine job at it. Number 3, Persona 5 Strikers. This is a fantastic follow-up to Persona 5. Mind you, it takes more into account with the original Persona 5. But if you play Royal, no worries, as it doesn't feel that weird from a story perspective, as that's what I played before this one, and I was fine. The characters are still fun to be around. If you liked them in 5, you will like them here. And the story does suck you in, and the new faces you meet are also great, such as the 2 new playable characters. The combat is the big departure here, as it's more in line with something like a Dynasty Warriors game, and it even has some interactable objects that add to the combat. Even though it feels different, it still keeps its persona so like so many personas with Joker and enemies having elemental weaknesses. Also, being able to fully control the other characters is fun as hell as they play differently from one another, with one of my favorites being Makoto. Number 2, Rune Factory 5. Look, I already know on the Switch this game has frame rate problems, and I'm not going to ignore that, though I will say it runs better when you're inside something like a dungeon or house. Even with that issue, this game feels like a nice, cozy, familiar bed. It has a town full of colorful and well-designed characters to interact with, And the gameplay loop of farming, dungeon crawling, and combat is still really fun and addictive. It's a laid back experience that you can play at your own pace with tons of things to do, with me putting about 100 hours in it. If you can't get it on the PC where it runs better, the Switch version is not a bad choice at all, and it's not unplayable like some would say. Now it's time for some honorable mentions. I know We Happy Few has a lot of tech issues and the combat is just decent, but I was surprised by how much I was drawn into this world and its 3 characters, and how nuts it got. If you're not into survival games with all the you have to eat and drink to survive, don't worry, as you can turn that shit off, which is what I did. I don't know if some would count this since it's a game that comes free with your PS5, but playing Astro Playroom is a must. In fact, I think it should be the first thing you should play whenever you get a PS5. It's a fun and really cute platformer that shows what the new PS5 controller can do. There are also tons of shoutouts to PlayStation games that you can find, such as these little robots dressing up as well-known characters. Not to mention there's a good amount of collectibles to keep you busy. If you have been gaming for years like me, especially on PlayStation, it will make you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Capcom Fighting Collection is a great collection of arcade fighting games. At last you have all the Darkstalker games in one place to play. So if you're a Darkstalkers fan, this is a must. They're also doing some other games that were never released, like if you ever wondered where Jim from Marvel's Capcom is from, well, his game Cyberbots is here. And we also got Red Earth. The rest of the games are Hyper Street Fighter 2 The Anniversary Edition, Street Fighter Puzzle Fighter, and Street Fighter Gem Fighter, which has always been one of my favorites. You can also play any of these games online, and they do run well, though it's clear some games are played more online than others, since I couldn't fucking find a game of Gem Fighters to save my life. Resident Evil 8 was a fun game, and I really enjoyed the castle area and its atmosphere. But I felt after that, in one more quick area, it basically turns into Resident Evil 4 in first person mode. Which is not a positive to me since I'm in the camp that doesn't hold RE4 in high regard when it comes to Resident Evil rankings. It's worth at least a playthrough, but feels like a step back from Resident Evil 7. Number 1. Sonic Frontiers. Holy crap, this game really surprised me. I had the feeling that I would like it from what I saw, but I didn't know I would end up loving it. The great sense of speed with all this open space was fantastic, and running into springs to connect to rails then fly off just felt right. The boss fights were fun, and the 3D Sonic cyber stages were short but sweet. Then you have the characters, which are done so well here, even the new face Sage. And the music does a great job of mixing the calmness of the open zones, then bumping it up for boss fights in cyberspace. There's even some great lyrical tracks. Yeah, it has flaws like popping and slow 2D cyberspace stages, but it wasn't enough to kneecap this wonderful game. Well, that was my list, and I hope you got some enjoyment out of it. If you have any favorite games you played in 2022, please share them. And as always, for gamers' sake, keep gaming.